Hello and welcome. If you're revising for your IGCSEs, you know the League of Nations is a huge topic. But we're not going to talk about the usual stuff, the big political failures. We're going deeper, looking at the work of its special agencies. This is your essential guide to understanding the other side of the League's story. So let's just get the big question out of the way. Was the League of Nations a total failure? I mean, that's its reputation, right? A talking shop that couldn't stop World War II. And look, it's an easy conclusion to jump to. And when you're talking about pure politics, yeah, there's a lot of truth to it.
But that is only half the picture. While the big-name politicians were arguing, the League had this other, maybe even more ambitious mission: to build a better, fairer world, to actually tackle disease, injustice, and human suffering. So away from all the high-stakes politics, how did that go?
Okay, so here's our game plan. We're going to break it all down, looking at the Refugee Commission, the International Labor Organization, and then its incredible work in health and social issues. And then we'll pull it all together for a final verdict. Let's dive in.
First up, the Refugee Commission. You have to picture it. After World War I, Europe was an absolute mess. It was just filled with displaced people, with prisoners of war who were miles from home. This agency had the massive, almost impossible task of trying to help them.
At its first huge job was dealing with former prisoners of war. These were men stranded all across Europe, totally separated from their families. And the number they managed to help is, well, it's just staggering. In just the first few years, the League helped get 400,000 prisoners back to their homes. And this, right here, shows you the League's potential for good. It was headed by this incredible Norwegian explorer, Fridtjof Nansen. And the commission didn't just send prisoners home. No, they set up camps. They found new homes for refugees, and they created something truly revolutionary: the Nansen Passport. It was the first ever identity document for stateless people, for folks who had no country to call their own. For thousands, this was an absolute lifeline.
But, and there's always a but, its work was tied to the political mood. As things got more and more tense in the 1930s, and countries got more suspicious of one another, the Commission found its power and its funding just fading away. The spirit of cooperation was dying, and its amazing humanitarian work suffered because of it.
All right, let's switch gears and look at another one of the League's big ideas: the International Labor Organization, or the ILO. Its goal was pretty simple but huge: improve working conditions for people all across the globe. And you know what? It had some pretty big wins. The ILO successfully campaigned to get poisonous white lead banned from paint, a huge public health victory. It pushed to limit how many hours young children could be forced to work. It championed the idea of an 8-hour day and a 48-hour week, something so many of us take for granted today. And it wasn't afraid to call out countries that were using forced labor.
But here's the catch. The ILO could investigate, it could recommend, it could name and shame, but it couldn't force anyone to do anything. Its suggestions were just that, suggestions. Many countries, worried about their economies after the war, thought that better conditions for workers would cost too much and make them less competitive. So they just ignored the advice. That's the key thing right there. It had no real power to enforce its rules.
Okay, now we're moving on to the area where the League really truly shone. If you're looking for undeniable successes, the Health and Social Commissions are where you'll find them. This is where things get really dramatic.
To see what I mean, let's just zoom in on one specific case. In Africa, work was underway to build the Tanganyika Railway. It was a brutal, incredibly dangerous job. Workers were dying from disease and exhaustion at a frankly terrifying rate.
How terrifying! The death rate among the African workforce was 50%. Let that sink in. 1 in every 2 workers was dying. An absolutely horrific statistic. This got the attention of the League's Health Committee. They couldn't send in troops, but they could send in experts. They investigated the conditions, they collected the data, and they put enormous pressure on the companies involved to clean up their act, suggesting better hygiene, medical care, all of it. And the result? The death rate plummeted from 50% all the way down to just 4%. Still a dangerous job, for sure, but the League's interventions saved tens of thousands of lives. That is a clear, measurable win.
And this wasn't a one-off. The Health Committee started global campaigns to fight huge diseases like leprosy and malaria. It even worked with the Soviet Union, which wasn't even a member, to stop a plague epidemic in Siberia. On the social side, the League freed 200,000 slaves in Sierra Leone and blacklisted major companies that were part of the illegal drug trade. The scope was just massive. Because of all this, the Health Committee was widely seen as the League's biggest success story. It really set the standard for international health cooperation and basically laid the groundwork for what would eventually become the World Health Organization, the WHO. So let's pull all this together. For anyone revising this topic, this is the key bit. We need a clear, balanced verdict on the League's agencies. Success or failure? Well, as it so often is in history, the real answer is a bit of both. Now, this slide here is basically your ultimate revision tool. Let's run through it. For refugees, the huge success was the Nansen passport and returning all those prisoners, but the big limitation was that its authority just vanished in the 1930s. For the ILO, its success was setting global standards, but its weakness was that nobody had to follow them. And for health and social work, well, the successes were massive, but they were still under-resourced. They were doing amazing things, but they couldn't solve every problem.
So, the most important thing to remember is this. The League's agencies were genuine pioneers. They were the very first attempt to solve global problems on a global scale. Sure, they made mistakes, and yeah, they were often underpowered, but they created the blueprint. The ideas, the structures they came up with, they were all picked up and developed by the United Nations after 1945.
And that leaves us with one last thought to chew on. The League's agencies had brilliant ideas, they had dedicated people, but they just didn't have the political muscle to make it all happen. They were pioneers without power. So what can their legacy, this mixed bag of amazing successes and frustrating failures, teach us about the challenges of getting the world to cooperate today?